Welcome back here on Live Now from Fox 912 on the East Coast and 612 on the West Coast. Take a look here as the Israeli military releasing new video showing exercises and training in the north ahead of a possible war with Hezbollah over in Lebanon. The Israel Defense Forces saying with the release of this video, the troops are training for combat, especially in fiery conditions. And this all comes as the Hezbollah terror group has intensified its attacks against northern Israel. The U.S. urging de-escalation, working to prevent a full-scale war between Israel and Hezbollah. That is just one development that we have been following. Also want to take you out to these breaking details coming in as the Israel Defense Forces spokesperson over in Arabic publishing evacuation instructions for Gazans living in Shejaiya, that's over in northern Gaza. Do want to bring in Hussain Abdul-Hussain, a research fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and an expert on the war to help break all of this down. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and explain the situation there. We appreciate it.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. Well, first off, can you talk a little bit more about these evacuations? What does that say to you that the IDF is urging this area in northern Gaza to be evacuated?
Well, what we're seeing now is the hit-and-run tactic that's being employed by Hamas. And this means that even though the IDF has really broken the Hamas leadership in most of Gaza, except for the small pocket in the south remaining, we see from time to time Hamas fighters regrouping. And they usually do that, especially when they find civilians. Whenever they find a mass of civilians, they regroup, they hide between these civilians, and they launch attacks on the IDF. And the IDF will naturally have to respond, will have to go in again and clear up the area from the terrorists. And when they do that, they issue evacuation orders to civilians to leave so that they can just fight Hamas face to face.
All right, I do want to pop up this live image that we do have coming in out of the Israel-Gaza border. It's one that we've shown quite a bit over the past several months here. And I want to get to another topic being discussed as the office of Israel's prime minister could potentially be rethinking his trip to the U.S. next month to address Congress. That's, of course, amid the war there in Gaza. Israeli military reporting that Netanyahu does believe the International Criminal Court will issue a warrant for his arrest in the coming weeks sometime. The court's chief prosecutor did announce earlier this year that he would apply for warrants for alleged war crimes against Netanyahu, as well as other Israeli and Hamas officials. Netanyahu's office there reportedly concerned about his trip to the U.S., which again is going to take place in late July, worried that if his plane were to make an emergency landing, let's say, in a country that does recognize the court, he could potentially be arrested. And again, this is all hypothetical, so that's why I keep saying potentially. But I do want to ask you, is that even a possible scenario there? Would it affect the decision, and how would a cancellation of the trip even go? How would that look?
Well, the cancellation of the trip would look bad, that we can't really secure our visitors from friendly and allied countries. Now, keep in mind that over the past 2 decades, we've always had presidents like the president of Iran, who visits all the way from Iran, flies into New York, delivers a speech at the UN, and goes back. And we never see presidents like the president of Iran or Putin, who flies often from Russia to China or to North Korea. We never see these guys, these really horrible, bad guys, worry about their trips. So it's surreal that we see the prime minister of an elected government, the government of Israel, having to fear for these issues. The second point I have here is that it doesn't make sense for any court to issue warrants against the person of Benjamin Netanyahu or any other person. He's not doing this on his own behalf. He's doing this as the head of a sovereign state. So if you have an issue with Israel, then okay, you have an issue with Israel, but this is not about the people. So, I mean, it doesn't add up even from a legal perspective. To me, this doesn't make sense.
And I do want to pop up this tweet or X post that came in from Doctors Without Borders. Now, a Doctors Without Borders staffer was killed in an Israeli strike, but the IDF says that he was actually a Palestinian Islamic Jihad rocket expert. Are there indications from what you've seen over the past several months that people serving in, let's say, aid groups, similar agencies, are also working for Hamas and other terror organizations?
Well, not only from the past 8 months, from the past years, this has been an issue all along for decades now. The people who join these organizations, they're not really vetted by any reliable government or security or intelligence authority that can say, okay, if you are working for Doctors Without Borders, then we verify that you are not a terrorist or belong to a terrorist organization. This doesn't happen. And because this doesn't happen, we've seen so many infiltrations. The terrorist groups do infiltrate these organizations, including, by the way, news agencies. And we know for a fact that Hamas fighters were embedded with the terrorists who attacked Israel on October 7. They were both reporting, taking pictures, and participating in the fighting. The IDF has found a laptop which showed one of the correspondents of Al Jazeera training with Hamas on anti-tank missiles and whatnot. So we have concrete evidence that many of these organizations do harbor, willingly or not, but they end up having these people who double. They're doctors, but at the same time, they're with Islamic Jihad. They're journalists, but at the same time, they're with Hamas. So this is not something that's unheard of. This has been happening for decades now.
We know that Israel has said that they do expect the Rafah operation there in Gaza should wrap up in a matter of weeks. So my question is, do we really know what comes next?
Well, by wrap up, I don't expect them to declare a day for the end of military operations altogether. I think what they mean is that the intensity of war and fighting will substantially decline and drop. And from now on, what we will see is what we just started talking about, Shejaiya. So what will happen is that now there'll be some mopping up, there'll be some operations to clear what's left of Hamas, and they'll be hit and run by Hamas, and of course, the IDF trying to pin them down and bring them to justice or take them out. So the intensity will go down drastically, and this will keep on going until Hamas has no one left to be able to mount any attacks on Israel or threaten the security of Israel and Israelis.
We know that Turkey's president did come out and accuse the U.S. of backing, quote, Netanyahu's plan to spread war through the region. Those comments made as there is the threat of that war between Israel and Hezbollah over in Lebanon. So what exactly is he saying overall? Because it sounds like it's kind of echoing his comments that we've seen over the past several months and really, I would say, over the past several years.
Well, the President of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, is a populist character, and he uses these foreign policy affairs to distract attention, domestic attention of Turks away from his own failures in governance, away from the corruption of the oligarchs and the team that surrounds him. And he's been doing this for a long time. And the irony is that even though he says these things, he never changes what happens behind the scenes. So, for example, he has an issue with the United States, but this doesn't mean that he will ever, say, downgrade diplomatic ties or withdraw from NATO or do something that's not, to his own interest. And the same thing even applies to his relationship with Israel. He comes up with all these bravado statements, and at the same time, he just maintains the embassy and ambassador. So he's a populist character, and whenever he's saying things like these, it means that he's facing some trouble, whether economic or political, at home, and this is his way of deflecting attention away from his own problems in Turkey.
All right, my last question here before I let you go. Just want to ask about essentially the situation that we've seen playing out over the past several weeks. We saw Netanyahu post that video where he did say that the U.S. is withholding arms, withholding weapons from Israel during the war against Gaza and the potential war against Hezbollah. My question, does it appear that they are withholding weapons there in the U.S.?
Well, I think the White House has said it out loud and in the public that there has been bottlenecks in when delivering arms shipments to Israel, and this doesn't make a lot of sense to me because why would bottlenecks certainly appear 4 or 5 months into the war? How come they didn't appear during the early days of war when the Israelis were really relying on these shipments, and when there's not another war that has broken out, so nothing changed, what's causing this bottleneck? So the reasoning doesn't make sense to me. I understand that there's a shipment of some sort of bombs that President Biden has been withholding for political reasons. I think this is bad, not only for our relationship with Israel, this is bad for all the countries that buy our arms. Countries that buy arms need reliable suppliers of arms. And people who buy anything need reliable suppliers of anything. So this is bad. We shouldn't make arms, especially those that we ship to allies, incumbent on politics or politicking or whatever domestic calculations that we have here in Washington and the U.S.
All right. Hussain Abdul-Hussain, I feel like I could talk to you forever because there are so many developments there. Is there anything else that you want to add before I let you go?
Well, I think we should really keep an eye out for what's going on Israel's northern border with Lebanon. I think the situation is really tense, and we in America have not really signaled to Israel that if war breaks out, we will be there for them. And I think this is dangerous. Israel has not chosen this war. This war has been launched by Hezbollah on Israel. Israel is defending itself, and we shouldn't really tie their hands behind their backs only because we have an election coming up or some sort of politics here in Washington.
All right, Hussain, thank you again for taking the time to be here with us and break it all down. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Josh.